corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today I wanted to bring you a spoiler-free review of the new Netflix series Midnight Mass. Now, if you've been around my channel for a while, you know that around this time of year, my channel becomes a Mike Flanagan fan account because I am absolutely obsessed with him and everything that I've seen that he's released. Most notably for me, the past few years, he's released 2 other horror series, limited series. That's The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor. Now, The Haunting of Hill House, I have a whole video dedicated to that, as well as Bly Manor. But for me personally, The Haunting of Hill House is one of my all-time favorite pieces of media. I absolutely loved it. I love the way that Mike Flanagan tells stories. I love the characters that he presents us with. I just find him to be a really emotional storyteller, and one that manages to, within the genre of horror, really make me feel something. And another thing I love is that he doesn't rely heavily on jump scares. That's not the way that he does his horror, which I really appreciate because I can't handle them. I cannot handle them. But he has a subtle way of scaring you, and that's what I really love. So let's talk a little bit about Midnight Mass. Midnight Mass came out this past Friday on September 24th. I watched the first episode late that night, and then the next day I watched the entirety of it. It is 7 episodes. You'll see some actors popping up that you've seen in other works that he's done, notably Hill House and Bly Manor. There's a lot of return actors, which I love. I love when a director really finds a core group that they love working with and you see the same faces coming back again and again. So I don't even know where to start with this. I'll start off actually by telling you that if you loved Bly Manor and Hill House, this is very different, very different. It's not a haunting story. It's not a ghost story, although some of the characters we meet are definitely haunted. It's very different. This one is a story about faith and about remorse and forgiveness. It's about finding or knowing what your purpose is in this world. And I really enjoyed it. When I first finished it, I was kind of like, what do I think of that? And it took me, because I was going to film this review that night, but I thought, you know what, no, let this sort of simmer, let it leak into your brain and fully get your thoughts about it. And now that I have, I really loved it. So what's it about? Where to begin with that? So we start off, again, this is going to be spoiler free, so any bits of the story I'm telling you are ones that we learn right away and won't ruin anything for you, because I feel like this is something that it's best to go into without knowing too much about it. But on the same token, now that I'm thinking about it, I started rewatching it again today, and I am finding it very interesting watching it, knowing what the story is. So both have its benefits. Anyway, the story starts off and we meet a man named Riley Flynn. When we meet him, he's just finishing up a 4-year stint in prison because in the city he lived in, one night he was drunk driving and he plowed into a young girl in her car and he killed her. So he did his time in jail, he's out now, and he's returning home to this tiny maritime island. It's fictitious, it's called Crockett Island, where he grew up, and he's going back to try to reconnect with his family and to just kind of figure out what his purpose is, what his next step should be. So it's kind of the story of the disgraced son returning home. And throughout, there are a few points when we can see that he's very, very haunted by guilt and remorse for what he did to this girl. So anyway, he goes home, but this story isn't really about Riley's past, and it's more about Riley's future. And so he goes home, he reconnects with his brother and his mother. His dad's a little colder But in time, that relationship grows as well. He reconnects with his old friends on the island that he grew up with, one notably being a woman named Erin, who's played by Kate Siegel, who's Mike Flanagan's wife. So she's been, I think, in everything, and I just love her. She's so wonderful. She has an absolutely outstanding monologue towards the end of the series that just really moved me to tears, and it was great. So he's reconnecting with her. For her, she's back home because she also left the island because she's pregnant. And she was in a very abusive relationship, and in getting pregnant, it gave her the strength and courage to leave that relationship because she thought she grew up with a very tumultuous relationship with her mother. So becoming pregnant is sort of her push to leave and go home because she does not want her baby to have an abusive parent the way she did. So her mother is now passed. She goes home, lives in the house, and begins working as the school teacher. Next up, the priest. This character was absolutely, by far, my most favorite. So amazing. The priest is played by an actor called Hamish Linklater. I hope I'm saying that right. But anyway, I had seen him before. I'd only seen him before in a comic setting. He played Julia Louis-Dreyfus's brother in the New Adventures of Old Christine. And I loved him in that, but that's the only thing I'd ever really seen him in. And I was very excited when I heard that he was playing the priest in this horror series because I couldn't wait to see what he could do with that. And it was so good, so good. So the whole town is sort of waiting for their old priest to come home. He went on a trip to the Holy Land, to Israel, and they're waiting for him to come home so they can pick up church service and whatnot. But instead, this new priest comes in his place, and he says, the old priest, he's in the hospital. He'll be okay, most likely, but I've been sent temporarily to lead you while we wait for him to recover and be well enough to return to the island. And there's just something about this priest. He's different. The words he says, there's an almost, mystical air to him. And the town quickly warms up to him because he's very charming and very well liked. And that character is just so good. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil anything, but he was definitely the highlight of the show for me. Another character that I loved is the sheriff, who is played by Raoul. I'm not going to try to say his last name because I will butcher it, but he was Owen in The Haunting of Bly Manor, and he was fantastic as the sheriff in this. Every time he was in a scene, I was so happy to see him. Much like in Bly Manor, he was just so great, and this role, he was so good in it. And then you get to meet the townspeople, and they're full of just some really interesting characters. Joe was one of my favorites. I really loved him. Riley's parents really grow on me. There's a doctor. She's a great character, and her mom. So you get invested in all these interesting characters who are also dealing with things like Joe in particular. He's dealing with a lot of guilt, and he's struggling with forgiveness. Being forgiven by someone that he's wronged very, very tragically, very intensely wronged a young girl in an accident. So he's struggling with that, with getting her forgiveness, but more than anything else, with forgiving himself for what he did. And it's a beautiful story. It's different. If you loved Mike Flanagan's other work with Hill House and Bly Manor, this is different. It's gonna go places you aren't expecting it to, and it's beautiful. Even just the imagery. There's this one scene towards the end, in the final episode, I believe, this image inside the church, and it's horrifying, but it's beautiful. I'm gonna put the image up if I can find it with no context because I don't want you to know, but it's just so beautiful. It's haunting, it's chilling, but it's beautiful. And it asks a lot of big questions, and you know, where religion is sort of the crux of the story, there's a lot of metaphor in there for different things. And I feel like that this story is probably more intensely personal to Mike Flanagan than the others. I feel like he's put a lot of himself into this and a lot of questions that he maybe grapples with. And I just thought it was great. It's a rich story, beautifully told, because if nothing else, Mike Flanagan is an absolute gem of a storyteller. And I really liked it. So that's where we're gonna leave it for here before I start rambling and start spoiling things, which I do not want to do. My daughter's also watching it, my 17-year-old daughter. And anytime I try to say anything, she's like, don't say anything because you're gonna accidentally spoil it for me. So I don't want to do that for you guys either. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments down below if you've watched Midnight Mass and if you have, what you thought of it. So I hope you're doing great. I hope you had a good weekend, and I will see you again real soon. Bye.